The same Rick and Morty episodes that once kept you wide awake with their mind-bending concepts now serve as the perfect lullaby. I've curated 2.5 hours of the show's strangest tales, specifically engineered to help you transition to sleep while still engaging with the content you love. We'll start with Season 1's most bizarre concepts and work our way through the series chronologically, highlighting how each weird adventure, from the Citadel of Ricks to interdimensional cable, reveals deeper character truths beneath the surface. By transforming what should be overstimulating sci-fi into a comforting audio experience, you'll rediscover familiar episodes through an entirely new lens designed for comfort rather than excitement. Have you ever noticed how the same Rick and Morty episodes that blow your mind during the day can actually help you drift off at night? It sounds contradictory at first. A show packed with existential crises, interdimensional chaos, and sharp scientific dialogue seems designed to keep your brain firing on all cylinders. Yet somehow, for many viewers, Rick and Morty has become the perfect bedtime companion. This paradox is particularly fascinating when you consider the show's content. Rick and Morty is fundamentally chaotic, filled with universe-hopping adventures, body horror, and philosophical quandaries that would normally keep you wide awake. The rapid-fire dialogue between Rick's cynical genius and Morty's perpetual anxiety creates a cognitive workout that should, by all logic, stimulate rather than relax. So why does this mentally stimulating show work so well as a sleep aid? Part of the answer lies in familiarity. After you've watched these episodes multiple times, your brain no longer needs to process the complex narratives actively. The information becomes predictable, and predictability is something our brains find deeply comforting. Even the most bizarre concepts, like turning the entire world into Cronenberg monsters or Rick turning himself into a pickle, become familiar territories your mind can navigate without much effort. The show's consistent voice plays a crucial role in this comfort. No matter which dimension they're in or what cosmic horror they're facing, Rick remains predictably cynical, Morty stays anxiously moral, Summer is self-absorbed, Beth is searching for validation, and Jerry is, well, Jerry. These character dynamics create an emotional anchor that remains stable even as the multiverse around them descends into madness. Your brain latches onto these constants amid the chaos. What's particularly soothing is the repetitive nature of Rick and Morty's central relationship. Rick's nihilistic outlook and Morty's perpetual distress create a rhythm that becomes almost hypnotic after multiple viewings. Rick will inevitably dismiss the significance of some catastrophic event. Morty will panic about the consequences, and they'll somehow muddle through to the next adventure. This pattern creates a narrative certainty that our sleep-ready brains appreciate. Even the show's background audio contributes to its effectiveness as a sleep aid. The ambient sounds of Rick's garage, the distinctive whoosh of the portal gun, or the gentle hum of the spaceship create a consistent sonic landscape. These sounds blend together after multiple viewings, transforming from active foreground elements into a form of white noise that masks other disruptive sounds in your environment. The alien chirps and interdimensional chatter become a sonic blanket that helps drown out the real world. From a neuroscience perspective, this phenomenon makes perfect sense. When we encounter familiar content, our brains require less glucose and oxygen to process the information. Studies on neural activity show that novel content activates multiple regions of the brain simultaneously as we try to understand and categorize new information. But with content we've seen before, this activity significantly decreases. Our brains shift from active processing to passive recognition, the perfect state for drifting into sleep. This effect is similar to what happens with comfort books or movies from childhood. The content itself doesn't even need to be calm or peaceful. It just needs to be predictable enough that your brain can relax its vigilance. It's why some people fall asleep to horror movies or true crime documentaries. The content itself matters less than your brain's relationship with that content. What's particularly effective about Rick and Morty as sleep material is its episodic structure. While there are continuing storylines, most episodes are self-contained adventures with clear beginnings, middles, and ends. This structure means you don't need to stay awake for narrative resolution. Each 22-minute package delivers a complete experience, allowing your brain to feel satisfied rather than hanging on a cliffhanger. Some episodes work better than others for this sleep-inducing effect. Total Recall, with its parade of absurd characters that appear and disappear, creates a dreamlike quality perfect for transition to sleep. The memory parasites that create false recollections mirror how our own memories blur as we drift off. Meanwhile, Rick Potion No. 9, with its apocalyptic conclusion and haunting soundtrack, creates a strange melancholy that can quiet an anxious mind. Even the show's darkest philosophical questions contribute to its effectiveness as sleep material. When Rick explains that nothing matters because there are infinite universes with infinite possibilities, there's a strange comfort in that cosmic insignificance. Our daily worries and anxieties seem smaller against the backdrop of infinite realities. If Rick can shrug off destroying entire civilizations, perhaps we can let go of that embarrassing thing we said 3 years ago that's keeping us awake. The show's animation style also contributes to this effect. While vibrant and detailed, Rick and Morty's visual presentation maintains consistent color palettes and character designs. This visual consistency means less new information for your brain to process each time you rewatch. The distinct art style becomes another familiar element that signals to your brain that it's in known territory. What's most interesting is how the show's weirdest episodes often make the best sleep material. Episodes like Interdimensional Cable, with its completely random, improvised TV snippets, require almost no narrative tracking. The disjointed nature of these segments mimics the disconnected thoughts we experience as we transition into sleep. Your brain doesn't need to follow a coherent story. It can simply float from one bizarre concept to the next, much like dream logic. The subtle background details in Rick and Morty create another layer of comfort for regular viewers. Spotting recurring aliens, technology, or interdimensional advertisements provides a sense of recognition without requiring active engagement. These Easter eggs become like old friends rather than puzzles to solve, creating a sense of belonging within the show's universe. Beyond the comfort of familiar details lies the strange paradox of Cronenberg world. In a series filled with existential nightmares, nothing matches the quiet horror of watching our protagonists bury their own bodies after abandoning their home universe. Yet something about this apocalyptic tableau creates the perfect mental conditions for drifting off to sleep. Rick Potion No. 9 starts innocently enough with Morty asking Rick for a love potion to win over his high school crush. But as these things tend to go with Rick's inventions, the situation spirals catastrophically out of control. The love potion interacts with flu season, mutating and spreading until every human on Earth except blood relatives becomes a grotesque Cronenberg monster, a term that pays homage to body horror director David Cronenberg. What makes this episode so uniquely unsettling isn't just the visual horror of watching humanity transform into shambling monstrosities. It's the casual way Rick responds when his attempts to fix the situation only make things worse. After multiple failed attempts to reverse the mutation, Rick simply shrugs and decides to find an alternate reality where they solved the problem but died immediately afterward. The pair then travel to this near-identical universe, bury their dead counterparts in the backyard, and seamlessly take their places. This moment represents one of the most profound acts of abandonment in the series. Rick and Morty don't just leave behind a ruined world, they leave behind their entire family and original reality. They completely surrender any attempt to fix their mistake and instead opt for the ultimate form of avoidance. They literally replace themselves in a universe where the catastrophe never happened. Yet despite this utterly horrifying premise, the episode's conclusion creates a strangely peaceful atmosphere. The visual design of the abandoned Cronenberg world uses muted colors and empty spaces, creating a post-apocalyptic landscape that somehow feels calm rather than chaotic. There's a stillness to these scenes that contrasts sharply with the frantic energy of the episode's middle section. The most powerful moment comes when Rick and Morty silently dig graves in the backyard for their alternate selves. As they lower the bodies into the ground, there's no dramatic music, no excessive dialogue, just the quiet, methodical work of burying yourself. The scene is punctuated by the haunting Mazzy Star song, "Look On Down from the Bridge," which creates a dreamlike atmosphere that transforms what should be utterly disturbing into something oddly soothing. Morty's thousand-yard stare as he sits on the couch afterward tells us everything. He's processing a level of existential displacement that would break most people, yet he's doing it in silence. This quiet acceptance mirrors exactly what our brains need to do when transitioning from wakefulness to sleep. Let go of our attachment to the problems of the day. Psychologically, letting go is fundamental to falling asleep. The act of surrendering control over our conscious thoughts parallels what happens in this episode. Rick and Morty literally abandon everything they know, accepting a new reality rather than fighting to fix the old one. While morally questionable, this surrender creates a powerful metaphor for how we must release our daily concerns to find rest. What makes the Cronenberg episode so effective as a sleep aid is this strange juxtaposition of horrifying premise and peaceful execution. The episode essentially tells us, if Rick and Morty can move on after literally destroying their entire world, maybe you can let go of that embarrassing thing you said at work today. There's a weird comfort in the extreme nature of their abandonment that makes our own daily worries seem infinitely more manageable by comparison. Creator commentary on the episode emphasizes that the Cronenberg world serves as a metaphor for the emotional struggles of the characters, particularly in relation to themes of loss and acceptance. When Rick so casually says they can just find another reality to replace their own, he's demonstrating his ultimate coping mechanism: emotional detachment through multiverse theory. Why care about anything when infinite realities exist? For viewers trying to sleep, this nihilistic perspective offers a strange form of release. The muted color palette of the post-apocalyptic world creates visual cues that signal to our brains that it's time to wind down. The empty spaces in the landscape mirror the mental clearing we need before sleep. Even the Cronenberg monsters themselves, once the initial shock wears off, move with a shambling, almost hypnotic rhythm that becomes weirdly predictable and therefore comforting. What's particularly effective about this episode is how it handles the ultimate fear of displacement. In abandoning their universe, Rick and Morty confront the terror of not belonging anywhere, yet they adapt. They continue. Life goes on. For anyone who's ever lain awake worrying about major life changes or feelings of not belonging, there's a strange solace in watching characters survive the ultimate version of that fear. The transition from active problem-solving, the frantic attempts to reverse the mutations, to passive acceptance, burying their alternates and taking their place, mirrors the mental shift we need to make when transitioning from day to night. We must stop trying to fix everything and simply accept that tomorrow is another day. The episode's structure actually guides viewers through this mental transition, making it surprisingly effective as pre-sleep viewing. When Morty stares blankly into space while Jerry chatters about the day's events, completely unaware that this isn't even his original sun, we see the ultimate form of compartmentalization. Morty has witnessed the apocalypse, abandoned his family, and buried himself. Yet he sits quietly, adapting to his new reality. It's the most extreme fake-it-till-you-make-it scenario imaginable, and there's something perversely comforting about watching someone manage to continue functioning after such a profound displacement. There's something oddly hypnotic about watching tiny beings power Rick's car through layered realities that function inside one another. While most sleep aids try to simplify your thoughts, the Microverse Battery episode does something counterintuitive yet brilliant. It organizes complexity into nested systems that mirror exactly how our brains arrange thoughts as consciousness begins to fade at bedtime. In The Ricks Must Be Crazy, we see Rick's ingenuity take a fascinating turn when his car won't start. Instead of a conventional battery, Rick reveals he's powered his vehicle with an entire miniature universe. The concept is mind-bending, yet somehow soothing. Rick created a tiny civilization inside a battery, then manipulated their development to make them generate electricity by stomping on special power-producing floors. And what's the electricity for? Powering Rick's spaceship. That's right, an entire species exists solely to keep Rick's ride running. But the episode doesn't stop there. We discover one of their scientists, Zeep Zanflorp, has created his own miniature universe, the Teenyverse, inside the microverse for the exact same purpose: generating power for his civilization. This creates these beautiful Russian doll-like nested realities where each smaller world operates with its own rules, yet remains connected to the larger whole. There's even a third layer when Zeep's assistant attempts to create a miniverse inside the teenyverse, pushing this concept to its logical extreme. The strange comfort of this episode comes from its organization of infinite complexity into clearly defined, contained systems. The vibrant colors and simple, cartoonish aesthetics of the microverse create a surprisingly soothing environment despite the existential horror happening within it. The design choices make the chaos of nested realities feel approachable rather than overwhelming, perfect for viewers winding down before sleep. When we watch Rick confidently navigate between these worlds, there's a strange security in his mastery over these complex systems. Despite being trapped in the teenyverse with Zeep, Rick maintains his characteristic control, providing viewers with an anchor amid the conceptual chaos. His certainty that he'll find a way back to the original microverse, and eventually to his own universe, creates a psychological safety net that allows us to explore these bizarre concepts without anxiety. What makes this episode particularly effective as a sleep aid is how it parallels the way our brains naturally organize information before sleep. As we drift off, our thoughts often transition from larger, more abstract concerns to smaller, more manageable details, just like moving from our universe to the microverse to the teenyverse. Each layer becomes more contained and structured than the last, creating a natural thought progression that mimics healthy pre-sleep cognition. The predictable power structures in each microverse, from Rick controlling the microverse citizens to Zeep controlling his teenyverse. Population. Create a rhythmic storytelling pattern that helps lull viewers. There's a cadence to how these nested worlds operate, with clear rules and hierarchies that provide a sense of order within the madness. Our brains appreciate this predictability, especially when we're trying to wind down after processing a day's worth of chaotic information. This concept connects beautifully to childhood experiences with Russian nesting dolls, where the revelation of smaller and smaller figures provides both surprise and comfort. There's something innately satisfying about things that fit perfectly inside each other. It speaks to our desire for order and containment. Sleep psychology suggests that our minds are naturally drawn to these organized systems because they help us process complex information in manageable chunks. The ordered systems displayed in the microverse positively affect brain activity before sleep. Research indicates that predictable patterns and structures help calm the mind, making the transition into restfulness easier. The microverse's clearly defined rules and power structures provide that rhythmic storytelling pattern that can gently guide viewers toward relaxation rather than stimulation. What's fascinating is how the episode manages to be both intellectually stimulating and oddly calming. While most sleep content aims to be boring or monotonous, the Microverse Battery episode takes a different approach. It presents a complex concept but wraps it in such well-ordered layers that our brains can process it without becoming overstimulated. It's like giving your mind an organizational system for all the chaotic thoughts that might otherwise keep you awake. The visual continuity between universes also provides a sense of stability. Despite being different worlds, the animation style maintains consistency, creating visual anchors that help viewers track the narrative without requiring heightened attention. The transition between worlds is shown through distinctive but gentle visual cues rather than jarring changes, which helps maintain that pre-sleep state where conscious attention is beginning to fade. When Rick and Morty finally escape the nested universes and return to their car, there's a satisfying resolution that signals to our brains that it's okay to let go of complex thoughts. The problem is solved, the car is running, and order has been restored to all universes involved. This narrative completion provides the perfect conditions for mental relaxation. All loose ends are tied up, allowing our minds to release any narrative tension we've been holding. The Microverse Battery episode illustrates exactly what our brains attempt to do when processing the day's events before sleep. Organize chaos into neat, contained systems. This organization creates a sense of security and comfort, making the bizarre concept both strange and soothing. By watching Rick create and navigate these nested realities, we're subconsciously given permission to organize our own thought patterns in preparation for sleep. From the ordered layers of the microverse, we discover another fascinating aspect of Rick and Morty that somehow soothes our sleep-ready minds. a dimension where infinite variations of the same genius scientist coexist. The Citadel of Ricks isn't just a sci-fi concept. It's a perfect demonstration of how our brains find comfort in categorizing even the most overwhelming ideas. What happens when you gather thousands of the smartest man in the universe in one place? Surprisingly, this chaotic collection creates one of the show's most strangely hypnotic settings. The Citadel represents a complex society where countless versions of Rick and Morty from different dimensions have established a shared civilization. We're introduced to this concept in Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, where what initially feels like an overwhelming premise, infinite versions of the same two characters, gradually transforms into something our pattern-seeking minds can process. The episode cleverly showcases how these infinite Ricks and Mortys naturally fall into recognizable categories and types, giving us mental shortcuts to understand what should be incomprehensible. Think about that for a moment. We're watching a show that presents us with potentially infinite variations of its main characters, a concept that should overload our cognitive abilities, but instead of feeling confusing, it becomes oddly satisfying. This happens because the Citadel episodes create a structured framework for understanding this chaos. We see Rick variants, organized by occupation, personality traits, and even fashion choices. Cowboy Ricks, business Ricks, guard Ricks, all fitting into recognizable social roles that our pattern-seeking brains appreciate. The visual design of the Citadel itself contributes significantly to this sense of comfort. Rather than presenting a chaotic jumble of interdimensional weirdness, the Citadel features orderly architecture and clear governmental systems. The buildings, streets, and public spaces follow logical layouts and distinct visual themes. This architectural stability creates a sense of visual continuity that anchors viewers despite the conceptual chaos of infinite Ricks. When we see the Citadel's Senate chamber or its downtown skyline, we're given familiar reference points that help us process the unfamiliar. This visual order extends to how the Citadel organizes its inhabitants. The society categorizes both Ricks and Mortys into clear hierarchies and roles. From the Council of Ricks at the top of the power structure to the worker-class Ricks and Mortys performing mundane jobs. This stratification creates predictable behavior patterns across different versions of the same character. We know how a waiter Rick will likely interact with a customer Rick, or how guard Ricks maintain their authority over civilian Mortys. These consistent patterns create a rhythm in storytelling that becomes increasingly comforting with each viewing. The sound design of the Citadel episodes adds another layer of sleep-inducing quality. The ambient audio includes distant portal guns activating, the murmuring of Rick and Morty crowds, and the mechanical hums of Citadel technology. Together, these create a consistent sonic background that functions as white noise, the kind of sound that many people use specifically to fall asleep. These audio elements maintain a steady volume and rhythm that can mask disruptive environmental sounds while providing just enough auditory interest to prevent complete silence, which some find unsettling when trying to sleep. What makes the Citadel's storylines particularly accessible is how they adapt familiar political and societal structures to this bizarre premise. We see election campaigns, police procedurals, and workplace dynamics, all standard narrative frameworks that make the infinite variations more digestible. In the Ricklantis Mix-Up, also known as Tales from the Citadel, we follow vignettes about police corruption, class struggle, and political manipulation. These familiar storytelling templates allow our brains to process the strange concept through recognizable filters. This combination of the bizarre with the familiar creates a mental state perfect for transitioning to sleep. Our conscious minds are engaged enough by the weird premise to stop fixating on daily worries, while our pattern recognition systems are satisfied by the orderly ways the show categorizes its chaos. It's similar to how counting sheep works. A mental task simple enough not to fully wake us, but engaging enough to prevent racing thoughts. The Citadel episodes also demonstrate how our brains naturally seek to impose order on chaos, the exact mental process that helps us transition to sleep. During our winding down period, our brains attempt to organize the day's random experiences into coherent patterns and memories. The Citadel shows this process externalized, as the infinite multiverse chaos is neatly organized into understandable categories and hierarchies. When we watch infinite Ricks forming a functioning society with rules and structure, we're subconsciously reassured that even the most overwhelming concepts can be ordered and understood. This creates a feeling of cognitive security. If Rick can make sense of infinite versions of himself, perhaps we can make sense of our comparatively simpler lives and experiences. This security is precisely what our minds need to let go and transition into sleep. What's particularly effective about the Citadel as a pre-sleep setting is how it balances novelty with predictability. Each Rick and Morty we see is slightly different, a different hairstyle, outfit, or personality quirk, providing enough variety to maintain interest. Yet they all follow predictable patterns of behavior that align with their variant type, creating a comforting rhythm. This balance keeps our minds engaged without demanding the kind of active problem-solving that would prevent sleep. The storylines within the Citadel often explore how seemingly minor variations can lead to dramatically different outcomes, like how one Morty might become a political leader while another remains subordinate. This exploration of butterfly effects and small changes mirrors how our thoughts naturally drift as we fall asleep, making subtle connections and exploring variations of our daily experiences in ways that gradually become less logical and more dreamlike. Those dreamlike thought patterns we experience while falling asleep find their perfect counterpart in one of Rick and Morty's most bizarre concepts. When Rick hooks up an interdimensional cable box, he doesn't just change channels, he fundamentally alters how our brains process information. The random absurdity that follows might seem like the last thing that would help you sleep, yet it works better than counting sheep. Interdimensional cable episodes center around a simple premise. Rick modifies the family's television to access shows from infinite realities. What makes these segments unique is that most of the content isn't scripted. The voice actors improvise bizarre scenarios on the spot. From Ants in My Eyes Johnson to Personal Space, these chaotic clips seem designed to keep you awake, but they actually work in the opposite way. The structure of these episodes is brilliantly simple. The Smith family lounges on their couch, flipping through channels while commenting on the strange programming. This format creates what sleep researchers would recognize as a safe container, a familiar, low-stakes environment where viewers can relax. There's no complex plot to follow, no character arcs to track, just a family doing the most mundane activity possible, watching TV together. What initially feels jarring, the rapid cuts between completely unrelated shows, actually works to quiet an overthinking mind. Our brains are constantly trying to make connections, to find patterns and meaning. But with interdimensional cable, that's impossible. Each clip exists in its own reality with no connection to what came before or after. This forces our analytical minds to surrender, to stop trying to predict or make sense of what we're seeing. The improvisational nature of the interdimensional cable episodes creates a sense of unpredictability, which can help quiet overthinking minds, making it easier for viewers to drift off to sleep, notes sleep researcher Dr. Vanessa Williams. When we can't predict what's coming next, we stop trying to get ahead of the content. Our brains switch from active processing to passive receiving, exactly the transition we need when approaching sleep. The varying lengths of these improvised segments create an interesting rhythm that mimics breathing exercises often recommended for sleep induction. Some clips last only seconds, while others continue for a minute or more. This inconsistent timing creates a natural ebb and flow, similar to the 4-7-8 breathing technique, where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 7, and exhale for 8. The unpredictable pattern gently guides viewers away from rigid thinking toward a more fluid mental state. What makes these episodes particularly effective as sleep aids is how they reduce our brain's workload. The absurdist humor requires almost no analytical thinking compared to the show's more plot-heavy episodes. There's no need to remember previous events, understand character motivations, or anticipate future developments. Each segment exists in isolation, requiring only that you observe rather than analyze. Consider Ants in My Eyes Johnson, a commercial featuring a salesman. With, well, ants in his eyes who can't see or feel anything. There's no deeper meaning to unpack, no complex narrative to follow. The joke is exactly what it appears to be. This straightforward absurdity bypasses our logical brain and speaks directly to our subconscious, much like dreams do. The animation style in these segments deserves special attention too. Unlike the main show's polished look, Interdimensional Cable features deliberately unfinished, sketchy animation. This rougher aesthetic creates a dreamlike quality that signals to our brains that we're in a different mental space. The loose lines and imperfect movements echo how our dreams often feel, slightly unfinished, with details that don't quite make sense. This visual approach pairs perfectly with the improvised dialogue. When Justin Roiland, the voice of both Rick and Morty, stumbles over words or breaks character with laughter, it creates moments of authentic human connection that feel strangely intimate. These imperfections make the experience feel less like consuming media and more like sharing someone else's stream of consciousness. A perfect mindset for transitioning to our own dream states. The low stakes of these episodes also contribute significantly to their sleep-inducing qualities. In regular Rick and Morty episodes, characters often face existential threats, moral dilemmas, or universe-ending catastrophes. But during Interdimensional Cable episodes, the worst thing that happens is someone changing the channel before Rick finishes watching How They Do It, Plumbuses. This absence of consequence creates a rare space of pure observation without emotional investment, ideal for pre-sleep viewing. The absurdist elements in these episodes also mimic certain aspects of sleep onset. As we drift towards sleep, our thoughts naturally become less logical and more associative. Random ideas connect in ways that wouldn't make sense in our waking hours. Interdimensional Cable accelerates this process by presenting content that already operates on dream logic. Shows like Ball Fondlers or Personal Space bypass our critical thinking and speak directly to the part of our brain that generates dreams. What's particularly fascinating is how these episodes create a perfect middle ground between stimulation and boredom. Content that's too engaging keeps us awake, while content that's too boring allows our anxious thoughts to take over. Interdimensional Cable hits the sweet spot. Interesting enough to hold our attention, but absurd enough that our analytical mind gives up trying to make sense of it. Sound design plays a crucial role too. The constant shifting between different audio environments, from the echoey studios of fake game shows to the tinny sound of commercials, creates a kind of audio white noise. This varied soundscape masks the silence that might otherwise allow intrusive thoughts to emerge, while avoiding the jarring transitions that might startle you back to alertness. While Interdimensional Cable creates soothing chaos through random audio shifts, another Rick and Morty episode deconstructs storytelling itself to create a surprisingly effective lullaby. Never. Rick and Morty might seem like the last episode you'd want to watch before bed, with its complex meta-narrative that traps our heroes on an endlessly looping story train. Yet this narrative maze creates a peculiar rhythm that mirrors how our consciousness fades as we drift towards sleep. The story train concept is brilliant in its simplicity. Rick and Morty find themselves trapped on a literal train where each car contains a different story segment. What makes this episode so special is how it deliberately shatters narrative conventions while paradoxically creating the perfect bedtime tale. The train itself serves as a meta-narrative device, forcing the characters to navigate through various story loops that represent different storytelling techniques and tropes common in the show. At first glance, the episode appears chaotic and intellectually demanding. The constant breaking of the fourth wall and self-referential humor seem like they would require active mental engagement, the opposite of what you want before sleep. Characters directly reference story structure, anthology formats, and even make comments about the show's writers. This meta-commentary creates a complex web of references that initially stimulates the brain rather than relaxes it. But here's where the magic happens. The episode's underlying structure actually follows classical storytelling beats despite appearing fragmented. Joseph Campbell's hero's journey gets explicitly referenced and deconstructed throughout the episode. This framework gives viewers a familiar path to follow, even as the content itself becomes increasingly bizarre. The predictable pattern beneath the chaos works much like a bedtime story. You know where it's ultimately heading, even if the path there is unusual. The visual design of the story train is particularly conducive to sleep. As the train moves through the narrative anthology space, it creates a rhythmic, almost hypnotic visual effect. The repetitive elements of the train's movement, the consistent tracking shots along its length, the regular transitions between cars, the cyclical nature of returning to previously seen locations create a visual metronome that gently lulls viewers. The train's design features a consistent visual framework that remains stable even as the stories within each car change dramatically. Literary references and storytelling terminology fill the episode, creating what could be described as a soothing academic quality. Terms like anthology, canonical, story circle, and narrative device pepper the dialogue, giving the episode the feeling of a bedtime lecture. There's something strangely comforting about hearing these academic concepts applied to absurdist situations. It's like listening to a brilliant but eccentric professor explain literary theory using cartoons as examples. For longtime viewers of Rick and Morty, the episode's meta-commentary creates an additional layer of familiarity. References to previous adventures and character dynamics serve as comfortable touchpoints amid the chaos. This self-referential quality rewards viewer knowledge without requiring it, creating a sense of inclusion that enhances the comforting effect. When Rick and Morty acknowledge the artifice of their own show, it creates a strange intimacy with the audience, as if we're all in on the same inside joke. Perhaps most importantly for sleep purposes, the constant narrative resets within the episode mirror the way our thoughts reset as we drift toward unconsciousness. Think about those moments just before sleep when your thoughts start to fragment, loop back on themselves, or suddenly jump to seemingly unrelated topics. The story train's structure mimics this natural mental process. A story will begin, develop briefly, then abruptly reset or transition to something completely different, just like our thoughts as we fall asleep. This mirroring of pre-sleep thought patterns makes Never Rick and Morty surprisingly effective as a bedtime episode, despite its intellectual complexity. The episode doesn't just portray chaotic narrative, it recreates the very experience of consciousness dissolving into sleep. Each car of the story train represents a different thought bubble that forms, develops briefly, and then gives way to the next, exactly how our minds work when transitioning to sleep. The episode even includes moments of genuine calm amid the meta-chaos. Brief scenes of character reflection or philosophical musings provide pauses in the frenetic energy. These quieter moments act as natural breathing spaces, allowing viewers to momentarily disengage before the next narrative loop begins. The variation between high-concept storytelling and these calmer interludes creates a natural rhythm similar to breathing exercises recommended for sleep induction. What's particularly fascinating is how the episode uses its challenging content to actually shut down overthinking rather than encourage it. By presenting a storyline that deliberately resists logical analysis, that in fact makes a joke out of attempting to follow it logically, the episode gives permission for your analytical brain to take a break. When Rick himself acknowledges the futility of trying to make complete sense of everything, it's like getting permission to let go of trying to solve problems before bed. The consistent visual aesthetic of the story train provides another surprisingly stable foundation amid the narrative chaos. Unlike the deliberately rough, constantly changing animation styles of interdimensional cable segments, the story train maintains a cohesive look and feel throughout. This visual consistency provides an anchor for viewers even as the stories themselves change wildly. The train's interior design features repeating elements like seats, windows, and connecting doors that create visual stability. For anyone who's ever tried to fall asleep while their mind races through disconnected thoughts, the story train offers a strangely comforting parallel. It's as if the episode is saying, "See? Even the most chaotic thought patterns have an underlying structure. Even the most disconnected ideas are still part of the same journey." This visualization of mental chaos organized into a physical form, the train, helps externalize and contain the very thought patterns that might otherwise keep you awake. If Storytrain's narrative chaos mirrors our pre-sleep thoughts, then the Vat of Acid episode represents something even more fundamental to sleepless nights: regret. What makes watching Morty erase and repeat his life so oddly? Soothing isn't the fantasy of consequence-free living. but the uncomfortable truth it eventually reveals about what happens when we try to outrun our mistakes instead of processing them. The premise starts innocently enough. After Morty criticizes another of Rick's plans involving a fake vat of acid, Rick retaliates by creating a device that allows Morty to save his place in reality and return to it whenever he wants, essentially giving him the ability to undo any mistake with the press of a button. It's like having a video game checkpoint system for real life, something most of us have fantasized about during those 3 a.m. thought spirals when we're replaying embarrassing moments or bad decisions. With this new power, Morty embarks on a consequence-free lifestyle that's simultaneously thrilling and therapeutic to witness. He asks out his crush without fear of rejection. He dives into dangerous situations knowing he can simply reset. He even experiences a beautiful, heartfelt romance that develops through a series of montages, all with the security of knowing he can erase any misstep along the way. These sequences are visually distinct from the rest of the episode, creating a dreamy atmosphere that feels almost hypnotic. The transitions between scenes are soft and flowing, with gentle color palettes that shift subtly between moments. It's as if we're watching Morty's experiences through the filter of memory rather than in real time. This visual approach creates a soothing rhythm that mimics how our thoughts begin to soften and blur as we approach sleep. What makes these scenes particularly effective as pre-sleep viewing is how they tap into a universal fantasy. Who hasn't lain awake thinking, if only I could go back and fix that one moment? Watching Morty act without consequences provides a vicarious release from our own daily anxieties and regrets. We get to experience the relief of erasing mistakes without actually having to face the emptiness that would come with such power. The episode's structure is particularly clever in how it mirrors the process of falling asleep. It begins with a simple concept that most viewers can immediately grasp: the ability to save and reload your life. This straightforward premise serves as an entry point, similar to how our initial thoughts when lying down tend to be more literal and direct. As the episode progresses, it adds layers of complexity and philosophical implications, just as our thoughts tend to become more abstract and interconnected as we drift toward sleep. The gentle montage sequences showing Morty's various adventures create a rhythm similar to counting sheep. Each small vignette flows into the next with soft transitions, creating a hypnotic effect that helps calm an active mind. There's something particularly soothing about watching someone navigate social situations with zero stakes. It provides relief from our own social anxieties that often keep us awake at night. But the episode doesn't stay comfortable for long. In its final act, it reveals the devastating truth behind Morty's consequence-free adventures. Each reset wasn't actually erasing his mistakes, but creating an abandoned timeline where those events still occurred. His actions had consequences after all, just not for the version of Morty we were following. This revelation forces Morty to confront the psychological weight of his actions in a way that resonates with our own late-night ruminations. This structure, from carefree fantasy to sobering reality, creates a natural arc that helps process daily experiences before sleep. The episode begins by indulging our escapist fantasies, but ultimately guides us toward accepting responsibility for our actions. It's a journey from denial to acceptance that parallels how we need to process our day before truly resting. The episode's dreamy quality is enhanced by how it portrays time. During Morty's consequence-free period, time becomes fluid and compressed. We see days, weeks, and even months pass in gentle montage sequences. This manipulation of time creates a sense of distance from reality that helps viewers detach from their own time-bound anxieties, a crucial step in the pre-sleep process. What's particularly effective about the Vat of Acid episode as nighttime viewing is how it transforms an existential crisis into a contained, digestible story. The episode takes the overwhelming concept of regret, something that can keep us staring at the ceiling for hours, and packages it into a narrative with a clear beginning, middle, and end. By watching Morty work through the ultimate consequence avoidance fantasy, we get to vicariously process our own relationship with mistakes and their aftermath. The episode's ultimate moral about accepting consequences provides a perfect sense of resolution for ending the day. When Morty finally realizes the true nature of his resets and must face the music for his actions, There's a cathartic release that mirrors what we need to experience before sleep. We need to accept that the day is over, mistakes and all, before we can truly rest. This acceptance is crucial to the psychology of sleep. Our brains naturally review the day's events as we're winding down, assessing threats, and processing emotional experiences. By watching Morty go through an extreme version of consequence avoidance and ultimately reach acceptance, we're given a template for our own nightly mental processing. The episode also navigates the line between chaos and order in a way that's particularly conducive to sleep. While the premise is bizarre and the implications existentially troubling, the storytelling follows a clear, predictable arc. This balance gives our brains enough stimulation to stay engaged, but enough structure to feel secure. The perfect combination for transitioning to sleep. From a single timeline with predictable consequences, we now enter the dizzying hall of mirrors that is Mortyplicity. Have you ever noticed that the most unsettling concepts become strangely comforting when they follow a consistent rhythm? This episode's endless cycle of revelation and destruction creates a hypnotic pattern that mimics the very moment our consciousness begins to surrender to sleep. Mortyplicity introduces us to a premise that shouldn't be relaxing. Rick has created multiple decoy families as a security measure, but these decoy families have themselves created more decoys, leading to a recursive nightmare of Smith families, hunting and destroying each other. The episode begins with a seemingly normal breakfast scene before aliens attack, revealing the family to be decoys. This pattern repeats again and again as we witness family after family discovering they might be decoys, only to be destroyed moments later. What makes this violent cycle so oddly soothing is its predictable structure. Each segment follows the same beats. Introduction of a Smith family, a moment of normalcy, the shocking revelation that they might be decoys, and their eventual destruction. This repetitive pattern creates a rhythm similar to counting sheep or listening to a metronome. Our brains naturally respond to patterns, and the consistent cycle of introduction, revelation, destruction provides a framework that becomes increasingly familiar as the episode progresses. The visual consistency across these various decoy families also contributes to the episode's strange comfort. Despite the chaotic narrative, the animation maintains a cohesive design aesthetic throughout. Each Smith family looks identical to the last, their homes share the same layout, and even their mannerisms remain consistent. This visual stability creates anchors for our perception, allowing us to feel grounded even as the story spirals into increasingly bizarre territory. It's similar to how a bedtime routine signals to our brain that it's time to wind down. The familiar visuals provide reassurance amidst chaos. As the episode progresses, we experience a gradual widening of scope that mirrors how our consciousness expands as we drift toward sleep. We begin with intimate scenes of individual Smith families, before pulling back to reveal dozens, then hundreds, and eventually thousands of decoy families across the planet. This progressive zooming out parallels what happens as we begin to fall asleep. Our focus shifts from immediate concerns to broader, more abstract awareness before consciousness fades entirely. The rhythmic nature of the decoy reveals becomes increasingly hypnotic as the episode continues. Each time a family is exposed as decoys, the revelation arrives with a similar cadence and visual cue. This creates a predictable pattern that allows viewers to anticipate the next beat, much like how a lullaby's predictable melody signals our brains to relax. Even the violence becomes paradoxically soothing because it follows such a consistent framework. We know exactly what's coming, which eliminates the need for heightened alertness. What's particularly interesting about Mortyplicity is how it addresses existential concerns in a way that actually helps viewers release their own anxieties. As decoy families debate which is real and which is fake, the episode gradually suggests that this distinction might be entirely meaningless. One decoy Rick points out that from his perspective, he's the original and everyone else is a copy. This message about the arbitrary nature of authenticity has a surprisingly calming effect. If even fictional characters can let go of existential questions about their true identity, perhaps we can temporarily release our own daily anxieties as we prepare for sleep. The episode also features a gradual descent into absurdity that mimics how our thoughts become increasingly detached from logic as we approach sleep. Early in the episode, the decoy families function with clear motivations and follow reasonable strategies. By the end, we've witnessed wooden puppet decoys, a family of squids, and even a family that's just a collection of sentient pies. This progression from logical to absurd parallels how our thoughts transition from ordered to dreamlike as we drift off. Throughout all this chaos, the most comforting element remains the consistent family dynamics that persist across every version of the Smiths. No matter which decoy family we're watching, Rick maintains his scientific genius and cynicism, Morty his anxious morality, Summer her teenage detachment, Beth her competent frustration, and Jerry his bumbling insecurity. These unchanging character dynamics create psychological anchors amid the shifting landscape of identities. Even as the episode questions what makes someone real, it reinforces that personality and relationships remain constant. The sound design of Mortyplicity further enhances its sleep-inducing qualities. The episode maintains a steady audio baseline punctuated by rhythmic bursts of action. The repetitive sounds of portal guns, laser blasts, and even the similar screams of dying decoys create an audio pattern that becomes white noise after extended viewing. This consistent soundscape, combined with the episode's visual and narrative patterns, creates a multisensory lullaby. By the episode's conclusion, the constant parade of decoy families has transformed from disturbing to oddly reassuring. The final reveal that even the spacefaring original family might be decoys themselves doesn't feel jarring, but instead completes the episode's message about accepting the arbitrary nature of existence. This philosophical resolution provides viewers with permission to let go of their own existential concerns. If identity can be this fluid for Rick and his family, perhaps our own daily worries don't need to be clung to so tightly as we transition to sleep. As fluid as identity becomes among decoys, it's nothing compared to the reality-bending nature of dreams in the Rick and Morty universe. Those softer edges and warped colors that appear whenever characters enter dreamscapes aren't just artistic choices. They're carefully engineered visual cues that your brain recognizes as permission to start its own dream processes, making these episodes surprisingly effective sleep aids. Rick and Morty's adventures into the subconscious mind represent some of the show's most surreal, yet strangely comforting territories. Episodes like Lawnmower Dog and Dreamcatcher take viewers through layered dreamscapes where the usual laws of physics and identity completely break down. What makes these episodes particularly suited for bedtime viewing isn't just their dream settings, but how they mirror our own brain's transition between wakefulness and sleep. The dream logic in these episodes follows patterns we instantly recognize from our own nocturnal experiences. Characters suddenly appear in new locations without explanation. People morph into other characters mid-conversation. Objects transform or behave in impossible ways. This fluid treatment of reality actually connects with our brains on a primal level. We're hardwired to recognize dream patterns because we experience them regularly ourselves. When Morty walks through a door in someone's dream and emerges in a completely different setting, our brains don't reject this as nonsensical, but instead recognize it as familiar dream architecture. Visually, these dream episodes employ a distinctive style that signals to our brains that it's time to wind down. The animation subtly shifts, giving everything softer edges and altered color palettes. Backgrounds become more impressionistic and less defined. Reality becomes more malleable, with objects and environments that bend and flow in ways that would be jarring in normal episodes but feel natural in these dreamscapes. This visual treatment isn't just artistic flourish. It's a deliberate technique that helps viewers transition into a more relaxed state. The sound design in dream episodes deserves special attention for its sleep-inducing qualities. These episodes feature noticeably slower pacing in both dialogue and action, creating a gentler rhythm than Rick and Morty's typically frenetic adventures. The background audio incorporates more ambient sounds, gentle whooshes as scenes transition, atmospheric tones that create a sense of space, and music that's more ethereal than the show's usual fare. This audio approach creates a multi-sensory experience that guides viewers toward relaxation rather than excitement. What's particularly fascinating about these dream episodes is how they mirror the way our own brains process emotions during sleep. In Lawnmower Dog, When Rick and Morty journey into the dreams of Morty's math teacher to incept him into giving Morty better grades, they encounter manifestations of the teacher's subconscious feelings, his insecurities, desires, and emotional baggage. This parallels how our own dreams help us process unresolved feelings from our waking hours. We see similar patterns in other dream episodes where characters confront emotional issues they've been avoiding in waking life. The journey through dream layers in Rick and Morty mirrors our own nightly descent through sleep stages. When characters first enter a dream, they typically retain most of their rational thinking and awareness, similar to our initial light sleep stage. As they move deeper into nested dreams or more abstract dreamscapes, logic breaks down further and emotion takes precedence, just as we experience during deeper sleep stages. By the time characters reach the deepest dream levels, they're in purely symbolic realms where metaphor replaces literal meaning, much like our own REM sleep, where the most vivid dreaming occurs. What makes these episodes particularly suited for transitioning to sleep is their balance between engagement and relaxation. They're interesting enough to hold your attention away from real-world concerns, but structured in a way that gradually decreases cognitive demand. The dream framework gives permission for your analytical brain to take a backseat while your more intuitive, pattern-recognizing systems take over. You don't need to track complex plot developments or remember intricate details. You simply follow the emotional journey. The creator commentary on these dream-focused episodes reveals an intentional design aimed at creating a sense of familiarity and comfort. The dreamscapes are constructed to evoke recognition rather than confusion, with visual and narrative elements that feel simultaneously strange and familiar. This paradoxical combination, bizarre yet recognizable, creates the perfect mental environment for transitioning into sleep. Your brain remains engaged enough to prevent racing thoughts about daily concerns, but not so stimulated that it keeps you awake. The emotional processing that occurs in these dream episodes provides a therapeutic element that aids in sleep preparation. Just as our own dreams help us work through unresolved feelings, watching characters navigate their subconscious fears and desires can provide a form of vicarious emotional processing. This can be particularly effective for viewers who struggle with falling asleep due to ruminating thoughts or emotional tension carried over from their day. The dream episodes provide a form of emotional release through narrative rather than direct experience. Perhaps the most sleep-friendly aspect of these dream episodes is their inherent permission structure for mental wandering. In regular episodes, following the plot is essential to understanding what's happening. In dream episodes, the expectation of logical coherence is removed. This gives your brain permission to drift and make its own associations, exactly the mental state needed for the transition to sleep. Your thoughts can begin following their own path without the anxiety of missing something important. What's remarkable about the dream episodes is how they maintain their sleep-inducing qualities across all seasons of the show. While each season has its own tone and thematic focus, the dream episodes consistently provide the most natural bridge between wakefulness and sleep. The combination of visual softening, ambient sound design, emotional processing, and narrative structure that mirrors sleep stages creates a perfect template for guiding viewers toward dreamland. Beyond the dream episodes with their gentle visual lullabies, Rick and Morty offers an unexpected source of comfort for sleep-deprived minds: Rick's nihilistic worldview. The cosmic insignificance that Rick constantly reminds us of creates a contradictory kind of peace when you're trying to quiet racing thoughts at night. What if the very philosophy that seems most disturbing in waking life becomes the perfect sedative when you're staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m.? Rick's nihilism isn't just a character trait, it's practically his religion. At its core, his perspective boils down to the belief that in an infinite universe with infinite possibilities, no single action or person can truly matter. While this seems bleak when you're fully awake and trying to find purpose in your day, it transforms into something surprisingly soothing as you're trying to drift off. Think about those nights when you're kept awake by replaying an awkward conversation or worrying about tomorrow's presentation. Rick's philosophical stance offers an unusual remedy: complete detachment from consequences. When Rick makes catastrophic mistakes, which happens almost every episode, his response is often a casual shrug and moving on to the next adventure. This ability to simply let go of disasters isn't just convenient storytelling. It's a template for viewers to release their own daily stresses. The visual language that accompanies Rick's nihilistic moments reinforces this sense of peaceful insignificance. When Rick delivers his most profound dismissals of meaning, the camera often pulls back to reveal vast cosmic backgrounds, endless stars, nebulae, or the infinite blackness of space. These visuals don't just emphasize how small human concerns are. They create a meditative backdrop that helps viewers contextualize their own anxieties. Your presentation tomorrow seems a lot less significant when framed against the backdrop of infinite universes. What's especially effective about Rick's brand of nihilism is its repetitive, almost mantra-like quality. His catchphrases and dismissals of meaning function similar to meditation techniques. When Rick repeatedly says variations of "nothing matters" throughout the series, it creates a rhythmic reinforcement that helps viewers accept life's absurdities. Like counting sheep or focusing on your breath, these philosophical refrains provide a mental anchor that can guide you towards sleep. The sound design during Rick's nihilistic moments further enhances this effect. His cynical observations are often accompanied by ambient space sounds or the gentle hum of his ship, creating a sonic tapestry that's surprisingly conducive to relaxation. These audio cues signal to your brain that it's safe to disengage from active problem-solving and drift toward a more passive state of acceptance. What prevents Rick's nihilism from becoming truly disturbing is how the show balances it with moments of genuine connection, particularly with Morty. These emotional resolutions create a satisfying narrative arc that helps release tension before sleep. We see this tension between Rick's stated beliefs and his actions constantly throughout the series. He claims nothing matters, yet he continues to protect his family and even makes significant sacrifices for them. This contradiction creates a philosophical lullaby. You can let go of your worries while still maintaining connections to what truly matters. The sleep-inducing quality of Rick's nihilism becomes most apparent in episodes where he directly confronts existential questions. When Rick casually discusses alternate timelines or the replacement of family members, he's modeling a form of radical acceptance that's surprisingly applicable to our own sleep challenges. If Rick can accept the complete randomness of existence, perhaps we can accept that some emails will remain unanswered until tomorrow. Rick's philosophical perspective offers more than just temporary escape. It provides a framework for processing daily stresses. By embracing the cosmic insignificance of our problems, we're not dismissing them entirely. We're contextualizing them in a way that makes them more manageable. This mental reframing is exactly what many sleep experts recommend for quieting an active mind before bed. The animation style during Rick's philosophical moments reinforces this soothing quality. The vast cosmic backgrounds that often accompany his nihilistic statements aren't rendered with jarring detail. Instead, they feature soft edges and gradual color transitions that signal to our visual processing systems that it's time to wind down. These scenes create a visual respite from the show's typically frenetic pace. What's particularly effective for sleep induction is the relationship between Rick's nihilism and the family's persistent search for meaning. This dynamic creates a perfect philosophical balance that mirrors our own internal dialogue as we drift toward sleep. Part of us needs to let go of the day's concerns, Rick's perspective, while another part needs reassurance that meaning exists, the family's perspective. This tension resolves not through logical conclusion, but through emotional acceptance, the ideal mindset for transition to sleep. Unlike the explicitly dreamy episodes that guide us through visual cues, Rick's nihilism works on a deeper cognitive level. It doesn't just show us dreamlike imagery, it actually helps dismantle the thought patterns that keep us awake. When Rick dismisses elaborate cosmic threats with a casual wave, he's modeling a form of cognitive diffusion, the psychological technique of separating yourself from troubling thoughts rather than engaging with them. The character dynamics between Rick's detachment and the family's emotional investment create a narrative rhythm that naturally winds down toward resolution. Episodes often begin with high-stakes conflicts that seem world-ending, only to conclude with Rick's nihilistic perspective putting everything into cosmic context. This narrative arc mirrors the ideal cognitive journey towards sleep, from active engagement with problems to peaceful acceptance of their ultimate insignificance. For viewers struggling with anxiety-induced insomnia, Rick's philosophical stance offers a particularly valuable template. His ability to acknowledge the worst possible outcomes without being consumed by them demonstrates a form of emotional regulation that sleep experts recommend. By accepting that bad things happen in an infinite universe, we can paradoxically find relief from the need to control every outcome. Have you ever wondered why Pickle Rick resonates so deeply with viewers despite being completely ridiculous? On the surface, a brilliant scientist turning himself into a pickle seems like nothing more than absurdist comedy, a wacky science experiment gone wrong that leads to some outlandish action sequences. But the genius of this episode lies in how it uses this bizarre premise to explore something much more meaningful: Rick's desperate attempts to avoid confronting his own emotional problems. The setup of the episode is deceptively simple. The Smith family is scheduled for therapy, something Rick clearly wants no part of. Rather than simply refusing to go or making up an excuse, Rick transforms himself into a pickle, claiming it's just to prove he can. The extreme lengths Rick goes to, literally changing his physical form, reveals just how desperate he is to avoid confronting the family's issues in therapy. It's not just avoidance, it's escape through transformation. What makes this episode so captivating is the stark contrast between the utterly ridiculous pickle adventure and the serious family therapy session happening simultaneously. While Rick is fighting for his life against rats and building himself makeshift limbs from their corpses, Beth, Summer, and Morty are discussing their grief, abandonment issues, and dysfunctional family dynamics with Dr. Wong. The juxtaposition creates this fascinating tension where the more outlandish Rick's pickle adventure becomes, the more it highlights his emotional avoidance. The physical obstacles Rick faces as a pickle directly mirror his emotional struggles. When he falls into the sewer, he's literally hit rock bottom. With no technology or help, he has to rely solely on his ingenuity to survive, much like how he would need to rely on emotional intelligence in therapy. His battle with the rats symbolizes his fight against vulnerability, while building an exoskeleton from rat parts represents his tendency to construct elaborate defenses against emotional intimacy. Each action sequence isn't just exciting, it's a metaphor for Rick's psychological state. What's particularly fascinating is how Rick's pickle adventure follows a kind of dream logic. The escalation from helpless pickle to rat-killing machine to eventual battle in a foreign embassy creates a surreal progression that feels almost like a fever dream. This dreamlike quality has a strangely hypnotic effect, especially when watched late at night. The absurdity becomes soothing in its extremity, creating a comforting buffer for the heavier emotional content. When Rick finally arrives at the therapy session, we get one of the show's most profound moments through Dr. Wong's assessment. She doesn't fall for Rick's intellectual defenses or his self-congratulatory story about his pickle adventure. Instead, she cuts right to the heart of his issues. You seem to alternate between viewing your own mind as an unstoppable force and as an inescapable curse. And I think it's because the only truly unapproachable concept for you is that it's your mind, within your control. This simple observation shatters Rick's carefully constructed narrative about himself. Dr. Wong's therapy session serves as the emotional core of the episode, revealing the truth beneath the pickle adventure. Her insight that intelligence is often used to avoid the discomfort of addressing emotional problems hits Rick hard because it's so accurate. She points out how Rick equates working on himself with submission, seeing self-improvement as a form of defeat rather than growth. This reveals Rick's fundamental psychological pattern, using his genius to avoid emotional vulnerability at all costs. The therapy scene works so well because the episode has already established the absurdist pickle premise. By the time we reach this emotional revelation, we've been disarmed by the sheer ridiculousness of what we've watched. The absurdity makes the emotional vulnerability more palatable. We're more receptive to these profound insights because they're wrapped in the bizarre package of Pickle Rick. The show essentially tricks us into engaging with deep emotional content by first entertaining us with outlandish sci-fi concepts. This balance between extreme weirdness and emotional truth creates a uniquely hypnotic effect. The episode lulls us into a comfortable state with its absurdist humor and over-the-top action, then delivers emotional insights that might otherwise feel too direct or uncomfortable. This rhythm, oscillating between absurdity and sincerity, mirrors the way our minds process difficult emotions, often using humor or distraction before confronting painful truths. Looking deeper at Rick's behavior throughout the episode reveals consistent psychological patterns. His need for control, his fear of vulnerability, his use of intellect as a shield, and his self-destructive tendencies are all on display. These patterns become more apparent as the episode progresses, building anticipation for the moment when Rick will either break through or retreat further into his defenses. The resolution feels earned because we've witnessed both the extremes of his avoidance and glimpses of his capacity for growth. What Pickle Rick ultimately demonstrates is the show's unique ability to blend bizarre sci-fi concepts with profound family issues. It uses the science fiction element, a man turning himself into a pickle, not just as a gimmick, but as a vehicle to explore deeper themes about family, therapy, emotional avoidance, and the barriers we create to protect ourselves from vulnerability. This combination is what makes Rick and Morty so effective as nighttime viewing. It addresses complex emotional issues through the safe distance of absurdist science fiction. Rick's microverse battery doesn't just power his car, it powers one of the show's most unsettling philosophical questions. Imagine discovering your entire universe, your civilization, all scientific progress and cultural achievements were created for the sole purpose of generating electricity for a device that isn't even particularly important. The vertigo of this infinite regression mirrors those spiral thoughts that keep us awake at night, yet somehow makes them easier to bear. In the episode The Ricks Must Be Crazy, we're introduced to one of Rick's most ingenious and morally questionable inventions, a battery that contains an entire miniature universe. When Rick's spaceship breaks down, he reveals to Morty that the power source is actually a microverse, a tiny universe he created, filled with intelligent beings whose civilization generates power for his vehicle. It's not just a battery, it's an entire reality with billions of sentient creatures who believe they're living normal, purposeful lives. What makes this concept so fascinating is how it forces us to confront the possibility that our own existence might be equally arbitrary. The horror sinks in when Rick and Morty enter the microverse and meet its inhabitants. These beings developed their entire civilization according to Rick's design, inventing technologies that would generate electricity, which Rick siphons off to power his ship. They have no idea they're essentially hamsters on a wheel, powering a device for a being they can barely comprehend. The existential crisis gets even more mind-bending when we meet Zeep Zanflorp, a scientist within the microverse who has, in a perfect recursion, created his own miniverse battery. And within that, another scientist creates a teenyverse. This Russian nesting doll of realities creates a hypnotic pattern of creators and creations, each level unaware it's merely serving the one above it. The pattern could theoretically continue infinitely in both directions, raising the unsettling question, what if our universe is just someone else's battery? There's something oddly meditative about this concept. As the episode keeps zooming in and out of these nested realities, it creates a rhythmic visual experience that's almost soothing, despite the disturbing implications. The repetitive structure mirrors how our minds often work when we're trying to fall asleep. Thoughts within thoughts, questions leading to more questions, our consciousness spiraling through layers of concerns about our place in the universe. These are exactly the kinds of thoughts that typically keep us awake at night. Who am I? What's my purpose? Does anything I do actually matter in the grand scheme of things? The Microverse episode takes these questions to their logical extreme. If your entire universe exists solely to power someone else's car, does anything you accomplish have meaning? Rather than providing easy answers, the episode sits comfortably in this uncomfortable space. What's particularly interesting is Rick's casual attitude toward creating and destroying entire civilizations. He sees nothing morally wrong with manipulating a universe of his creation, even threatening to destroy it when they stop generating power for him. "Your entire culture powers my brake lights," he shouts at one point, revealing the trivial purpose their existence serves. This callous nihilism might seem disturbing, but there's a strange comfort in it too. If even the creator of a universe doesn't think existence needs some grand purpose, maybe we can stop worrying about finding one for ourselves. The conflict between Rick and Zeep represents this existential quandary perfectly. Zeep experiences the same horror we would upon learning his reality is merely a power source. He rebels against his creator, refusing to accept his predetermined role. Their battle of wits is really about the meaning of existence itself. Can created beings defy their creator's purpose? Do we have any autonomy if our reality was designed for someone else's benefit? Despite these heavy philosophical questions, the episode maintains a hypnotic rhythm through its visual structure. We keep returning to the nested universes, each with their own identical patterns of development and revelation. This repetition creates a soothing cadence that counterbalances the existential dread. There's something almost lullaby-like about watching these patterns unfold and repeat, like counting sheep, but with existential crises instead of farm animals. The resolution of the episode offers its own strange comfort. Rick and Zeep eventually reach a stalemate, with Rick forcing Zeep to restore power production or face destruction. The status quo returns, with the microverse continuing to power Rick's car. While this might seem like a depressing conclusion, the microverse remains enslaved, it also suggests that purpose can be found even within constraints we didn't choose. Psychological research indicates that contemplating vastness, such as these nested realities, can actually help alleviate anxiety. When we consider how small we are in the cosmic scheme, our immediate problems often shrink proportionally. The episode's exploration of infinite regression paradoxically provides perspective. If we're all just powering someone else's brake lights, maybe we can stop taking ourselves so seriously. This perspective shift is exactly what makes these mind-bending concepts helpful for sleep. Our racing thoughts about daily problems and existential worries lose their urgency when placed against the backdrop of nested universes. The episode doesn't dismiss these concerns, but puts them in a context where they become manageable, even somewhat absurd. The very things that typically keep us awake, questions about meaning, purpose, and our place in existence, become more bearable when explored through the safe distance of Rick's microverse battery. The episode's structure itself follows a soothing rhythm that mimics how we might want our thoughts to flow as we prepare for sleep. Starting with a simple premise, expanding into complexity, and ultimately returning to a state of acceptance. The circular pattern creates closure, even amid unanswered questions, much like how we must eventually let go of our racing thoughts to find sleep. From structured universes to complete dimensional chaos, interdimensional cable episodes abandon all narrative structure, yet they might be the most effective sleep aid in the entire series. The improvised stream of consciousness TV snippets that Rick and family passively consume actually mirror the exact patterns your brain creates as you're drifting off to sleep. What seems like random nonsense on the surface is actually working in perfect harmony with your brain's natural transition to dreamland. Interdimensional cable isn't just a bizarre concept. It's Rick's invention that allows the family to watch television broadcasts from infinite realities simultaneously. Unlike the carefully constructed microverse battery, these episodes embrace pure chaos. Rick simply hooks up a device to the family TV, and suddenly they're flipping through channels showing everything from a commercial for real fake doors to a talk show hosted by a hammer. There's no plot to follow, no character arcs to track, just random snippets from infinite realities playing one after another. What makes these episodes so fascinating is their production approach. Many of the TV segments feature improvised dialogue rather than scripted lines. This spontaneous, off-the-cuff quality creates a feeling of genuine unpredictability that mirrors how our brains operate when we're about to fall asleep. The commercials for products like Ants in My Eyes, Johnson's Electronics, or Two Brothers don't follow any conventional narrative rules. The voice actors simply make things up as they go, often breaking into laughter or losing track of their own premise. This improvisational approach generates a special kind of viewing experience. When we watch normal television, our brains work to follow plot threads and predict what might happen next. But with interdimensional cable, that cognitive work becomes impossible. There are no patterns to recognize, no narratives to follow, just pure, unfiltered randomness. And that's precisely why it works so well as a sleep aid. Psychological research shows that as we drift toward sleep, our brains naturally produce more random, disconnected thoughts. The pre-sleep phase features a lack of linearity and coherence, almost exactly matching the disjointed storytelling found in Interdimensional Cable. When a commercial for eye holes immediately cuts to alien athletes playing a sport with rules no human could understand, followed by personal space guy increasingly removing his own skin, there's a strange resonance with how our thoughts jumble together as consciousness begins to fade. The rapid switching between completely unrelated concepts in these episodes mirrors the way our minds naturally drift as we fall asleep. One moment you're thinking about tomorrow's meeting, the next about a childhood memory, then suddenly about whether penguins have knees. This natural thought progression before sleep is perfectly mimicked by the show's format. It's like watching your own pre-sleep brain patterns play out on screen. This is why many fans report that watching Interdimensional Cable episodes before bed provides a uniquely relaxing experience. The randomness and absurdity allow viewers to disengage from daily stresses. Unlike shows that demand emotional investment or cognitive attention, these episodes create a comforting backdrop that permits the mind to wander freely. The family's passive viewing experience, sitting on the couch, making occasional comments, but mostly just absorbing the strange content, creates a meta-relaxation effect for the actual viewer. Consider how the Smith family watches these shows. They don't lean forward in anticipation or debate complex plot points. Instead, they recline, make occasional observations, and let the bizarre content wash over them. When Rick casually flips to a dimension where people have pizza for phones and phones for pizza, the family doesn't question the logic. They simply accept it and move on. This passive acceptance creates permission for the real viewer to do the same with their racing thoughts. The absurdist humor throughout these episodes serves another sleep-friendly purpose: stress relief. Laughing at cosmic absurdity releases tension. When an interdimensional ad shows a man frantically promoting a store while insects crawl all over his eyes, rendering him unable to see or properly price his merchandise, the sheer ridiculousness prompts a release of psychological pressure. The humor is so detached from reality that it allows our brains to temporarily disconnect from real-world problems. Even the visual presentation of these episodes supports relaxation. Unlike the high-stakes, fast-paced action sequences in other episodes, Interdimensional Cable features the family comfortably seated on their couch, often in pajamas or comfortable clothes. This visual cue subtly signals to our brains that relaxation is appropriate. The actual cable segments themselves typically feature simple animation styles with limited movement, another factor that reduces visual stimulation compared to more kinetic episodes. The beauty of Interdimensional Cable lies in its complete freedom from expectation. Without narrative rules to follow, viewers don't experience the tension of wondering how plots will resolve. There's no need to remember characters' names or follow complex storylines. Each segment exists as its own self-contained universe, appearing briefly before vanishing forever. This liberation from narrative responsibility creates mental space for the viewer's own consciousness to begin its transition toward sleep. The random story fragments in Interdimensional Cable fulfill another important function for nighttime viewing. They provide just enough cognitive engagement to distract from anxious thoughts without demanding full attention. Many people struggle to fall asleep because their minds fixate on worries or to-do lists. These episodes offer the perfect alternative focus. Interesting enough to hold attention away from anxiety, but not so engaging that they keep you awake wanting to see what happens next. For anyone who's ever caught themselves drifting into strange, disconnected thoughts while falling asleep, Interdimensional Cable offers a strangely familiar experience. The random commercials like Turbulent Juice or Ball Fondlers demonstrate dream logic rather than waking logic. They establish premises without explaining them, introduce bizarre characters without backstories, and abandon concepts mid-development, just like our dreams do. It's almost as if these episodes were designed specifically to mimic the exact patterns our brains naturally create during the transition to sleep. While Interdimensional Cable mimics our pre-sleep thought patterns, Total Recall takes us directly into the territory of false memories. What if everything you remember about your loved ones was an elaborate lie created by parasitic aliens? This episode doesn't just entertain with its bizarre premise. It forces us to confront an unsettling question about our own memories. How can we truly know which cherished moments actually happened, and which might be comfortable fictions we've created? The premise is brilliantly simple, yet psychologically complex. The Smith family finds themselves trapped in their home with memory parasites that reproduce by implanting false memories. Every time someone remembers a character who wasn't there before, another parasite is born. What starts as a single Uncle Steve quickly spirals into dozens of increasingly absurd characters like Sleepy Gary, who Beth believes is her husband, and Photography Raptor, who supposedly took the family's Christmas photos. These parasites don't just appear, they come complete with elaborate backstories and emotional connections that feel completely real to the family. The genius of the episode is how it makes us doubt our own understanding of reality alongside the characters. As viewers, we know these creatures aren't real, but we also see the vivid flashbacks they've implanted, creating a disorienting effect that mirrors the family's confusion. The escalating absurdity serves a deeper purpose beyond just comedy. Characters like Pencil Vester and Reverse Giraffe represent our tendency to create idealized versions of our past. Think about how often we remember vacations as perfect despite the arguments and disappointments, or how we glorify old relationships by filtering out the painful parts. These parasites are the physical manifestation of this very human tendency, creating perfect, conflict-free memories that never actually existed. What makes this episode truly profound is its clever twist. When the family is surrounded by dozens of potential parasites and has no idea who's real, Rick makes a crucial discovery. The parasites can only create positive memories. Real memories include pain, conflict, and disappointment. This revelation transforms the episode from a sci-fi romp into something much more emotionally resonant. The visual language of the episode reinforces this journey from chaos to clarity. Early scenes are cluttered with characters, creating a visually overwhelming environment that mirrors the family's mental confusion. As they begin to identify the parasites by recalling painful memories with real family members, the visual space gradually clears. This visual decluttering creates a soothing rhythm as the chaos resolves into order. This rhythm of paranoia and resolution makes Total Recall surprisingly effective as a nighttime viewing experience. The episode follows a pattern of tension and release as each parasite is identified and eliminated. There's something oddly satisfying about watching the family systematically restore order to their home and their memories, creating a pattern that's both engaging and ultimately calming. The emotional core of the episode comes when family members must recall painful memories to prove each other's existence. Beth remembers her father abandoning her as a child. Rick recalls Morty burying his own corpse from another dimension. Summer remembers being caught masturbating by her father. These aren't just random, embarrassing moments. They're the authentic emotional connections that define real relationships. This insight offers a strangely comforting message. Real relationships include pain. While the idealized, conflict-free relationships offered by the parasites initially seem appealing, they're ultimately hollow. The episode suggests that the messy, sometimes painful reality of our connections with others is what makes them authentic and meaningful. For viewers lying in bed, perhaps ruminating on their own relationships or past conflicts, there's a peculiar comfort in this message. The uncomfortable memories you might be trying to suppress as you fall asleep, they're actually evidence of real connections. The arguments, disappointments, and awkward moments aren't failures. They're proof that your relationships aren't parasitic fictions. The episode gradually transforms existential horror into acceptance. What begins as a terrifying premise, that everything you believe about your loved ones could be a lie, ultimately becomes reassuring. By the end, the family has a clearer understanding of what makes their relationships real, even if that reality includes pain. There's something deeply soothing about this resolution, making it perfect for nighttime viewing when we're most vulnerable to existential doubts. Fan reactions to Total Recall often highlight this emotional depth, noting how effectively the episode balances its humor with moments that genuinely resonate with personal experiences of memory and loss. The episode's ability to transform a high-concept sci-fi premise into an exploration of authentic relationships is precisely what makes Rick and Morty so effective as both entertainment and, surprisingly, as a sleep aid. The episode also creates emotional clarity through its structure. As the family confronts these false memories, they must engage with their actual history together, both good and bad. This process mirrors how we often process our own days as we're falling asleep, sorting through experiences and placing them in the context of our longer emotional narratives. Throughout the episode, characters express confusion and frustration over their past experiences, adding to the emotional weight of their situation. These moments of vulnerability make the resolution more satisfying when it comes, as the family emerges with a clearer understanding of their connections to each other. While the Smith family finds meaning through their shared painful memories, the Microverse Battery episode dives into something entirely different: the strange comfort of cosmic insignificance. Have you ever found yourself staring at the ceiling at night, unable to sleep because your problems feel overwhelming, only to look at the stars and suddenly feel your worries shrink? That's exactly the paradoxical comfort this episode offers through its nested universes and existential horror. The visual journey of zooming in and out of Rick's Microverse Battery creates an almost hypnotic rhythm that mirrors meditative practices. As we move from our universe into Rick's Microverse and then into Zeep's Miniverse, the camera work establishes a repetitive pattern that lulls viewers into a contemplative state. These visual techniques don't just advance the story. They create a soothing cadence that helps our minds process complex ideas about our place in the universe, while maintaining a calming rhythm perfect for pre-sleep viewing. What makes the cosmic insignificance in this episode so uniquely comforting is how it's channeled through Zeep Zandflorp, brilliantly voiced by Stephen Colbert. As the most brilliant scientist in the microverse, Zeep encounters a crisis that many of us face in the dark of night, discovering that everything he believed about his purpose and reality was a constructed illusion. His entire civilization, all their scientific achievements and artistic expressions, exists solely to power Rick's car. It's a devastating revelation that forces Zeep to confront an uncomfortable truth. His perceived importance in the grand scheme of things is completely arbitrary. This revelation creates perfect conditions for exploring our own relationship with cosmic insignificance. When Rick casually tells Zeep, "This isn't special. This is happening infinite times across realities including this," he's expressing a nihilistic worldview that's strangely pacifying when we're trying to quiet racing thoughts. By suggesting that nothing is unique or special, Rick removes the pressure of exceptionalism that often keeps us awake at night. The conflict between Rick and Zeep is particularly fascinating because Zeep functions as Rick's intellectual equal. Their battle of wits represents the internal struggle many of us face when confronting existential questions. On one side is Rick's nihilistic acceptance that nothing matters, and on the other is Zeep's desperate attempt to assert meaning and purpose in a universe that suddenly feels hollow. This intellectual tug-of-war mirrors the thought patterns many experience before sleep, questioning our significance while simultaneously seeking meaning. When Zeep discovers his universe is merely a battery, his existential meltdown is both disturbing and relatable. Who hasn't wondered if our own existence serves some greater purpose we can't comprehend? The genius of this episode is how it transforms this potentially anxiety-inducing thought into something strangely soothing. By exaggerating our cosmic insignificance to absurd levels, the show helps us process our own existential concerns through the safety of fiction and humor. The scientific concepts presented in the episode also contribute to its calming effect. The nested universes create a fractal-like structure that suggests order within chaos, a comforting notion when we're trying to make sense of our place in the world. Even as Rick and Zeep battle across dimensions, there's an underlying pattern to their conflict that provides a sense of predictability and structure. The scientific framework of energy generation through microverses gives viewers a simplified model to conceptualize complex ideas about purpose and reality. Perhaps most interesting is how the episode resolves with a return to status quo. After all the existential chaos, Rick simply continues using his battery, and life goes on. This resolution offers a strange comfort in its suggestion that even after confronting the most disturbing truths about our existence, daily life continues. The implication is that we can acknowledge our cosmic insignificance without being paralyzed by it. A powerful message for quieting an anxious mind before sleep. The visual techniques employed throughout the episode further enhance its soothing qualities. As the camera repeatedly zooms in and out of these nested universes, it creates a visual rhythm that's almost hypnotic. This pattern mimics the repetitive focusing techniques used in many meditation practices, where attention is directed to progressively smaller details before expanding outward again. For viewers watching before bed, this visual rhythm can help transition the mind from active engagement to the more passive state conducive to sleep. What makes the Microverse Battery episode particularly effective as a pre-sleep viewing choice is how it transforms potentially anxiety-inducing concepts into sources of comfort. By confronting the idea that we might be insignificant in the grand cosmic scheme, the episode actually helps diminish the importance of our daily worries. If nothing truly matters in a universe of infinite possibilities, then perhaps we don't need to lie awake stressing about tomorrow's meeting or that awkward conversation from earlier today. Rick's nihilistic perspective, though initially jarring, becomes oddly reassuring in this context. His attitude suggests that even if we discover our entire reality is meaningless, we can still find ways to function and even thrive within that knowledge. This perspective helps put our problems in proportion. If Rick can shrug off the moral implications of enslaving an entire civilization, perhaps we can let go of the day's smaller frustrations and disappointments. The relationship between Rick and Zeep demonstrates another important aspect of finding peace in cosmic insignificance. The recognition that even brilliant minds struggle with these questions. Zeep's existential crisis upon learning the truth about his universe mirrors our own moments of doubt and questioning. By watching these characters process these difficult realizations, viewers gain a sense of companionship in their own late-night wonderings about purpose and meaning. While the Microverse Battery represents cosmic meaninglessness, Anatomy Park shows us the strange comfort found in biological systems, even failing ones. Inside the body of a homeless man named Ruben lies not just a theme park of horrors, but perhaps the most perfectly structured chaos in Rick and Morty's universe, where even disease and death follow reassuring patterns that our anxious minds can recognize. Anatomy Park takes the familiar concept of an amusement park and transplants it somewhere decidedly unfamiliar, inside the human body. But this isn't just any body. It's the rapidly deteriorating organism of a homeless man named Ruben. The juxtaposition is immediately jarring, yet oddly fascinating. There's something about watching characters navigate this internal landscape that creates an unusual sense of comfort despite the grotesque setting. What makes this episode particularly effective as nighttime viewing is how it parodies the structured chaos of Jurassic Park. The familiar story beats of a theme park gone wrong provide viewers with a recognizable framework, even as the setting becomes increasingly bizarre. We know there will be an initial tour, something will go wrong, characters will be separated, and eventually they'll need to escape. This borrowed structure creates a predictable narrative rhythm that our brains can latch onto amidst the weirdness. Dr. Xenon Bloom, brilliantly voiced by John Oliver, serves as our guide through this internal anatomy adventure. His character represents a fascinating counterpoint to Rick's usual chaotic approach to science. Where Rick typically embraces disorder, Dr. Bloom attempts to implement systems, procedures, and organization. His meticulous attention to detail and proper scientific methodology stands in stark contrast to Rick's haphazard genius. This character dynamic illustrates how even within Rick's chaotic world, there exists an appreciation for order and structure, even if that structure is literally falling apart around them. The episode follows a remarkably clear narrative structure that provides a satisfying sense of progression. We enter the body, identify the problems, disease outbreaks, work to solve them, and ultimately escape before Ruben's body completely shuts down. This straightforward progression creates a comforting rhythm that guides viewers through the bizarre happenings. The episode's clear beginning, middle, and end mirror the way our minds prefer to organize information, a particularly welcome approach when we're trying to quiet racing thoughts before sleep. What's particularly interesting about Anatomy Park is how it takes the inherently chaotic and messy nature of biological systems and imposes an artificial order on them. The human body itself represents a remarkable example of organized chaos. Billions of cells and microorganisms working in concert, digestive processes breaking down matter, immune responses fighting invaders. By mapping amusement park attractions onto these biological realities, it's like a theme park inside a human body. The episode creates a strange synthesis of scientific reality and fantastical imagination. The psychological comfort viewers derive from this episode stems partly from how it handles chaos. Research suggests that finding order within chaos significantly reduces anxiety. When we watch characters navigate the increasingly dangerous environment of Rubin's failing body systems, we're experiencing a controlled form of chaos, one with clear rules and boundaries. Even as attractions like Pirates of the Pancreas and Spleen Mountain face disease outbreaks, there's an underlying logic to how these systems function and fail. The episode's visual design contributes significantly to its soothing qualities. Despite the potentially disturbing concept of being inside a dying body, the creators chose a vibrant color palette and imaginative designs that transform biology into something almost magical. Blood vessels become water slides, organs become themed lands, and cellular structures become architectural features. This visual transformation takes something potentially disturbing and makes it not just palatable but genuinely engaging. The colors inside Anatomy Park create a visual rhythm that's particularly effective for nighttime viewing. The reds of blood vessels, blues of veins, and yellows of various fluids create a warm, cool balance that's visually stimulating without being jarring. Even during moments of peril, like when hepatitis A breaks out, or when Rubin's body begins to shut down, the color scheme maintains a consistency that helps viewers process the chaos in an organized way. The episode's sound design further enhances this effect, using subtle biological sounds like heartbeats and breathing as a rhythmic backdrop, occasionally punctuated by the more jarring sounds of theme park attractions and screaming patrons. This audio landscape creates yet another layer of organized chaos that our brains can process and find comfort in. What makes Anatomy Park such perfect bedtime viewing is how it balances gross-out humor with genuine creativity. Yes, the characters are trudging through bodily fluids and fighting diseases, but they're doing so in cleverly designed environments that transform the disgusting into the fascinating. The episode never lets the grossness overwhelm the adventure, maintaining a delicate balance that keeps viewers engaged without becoming revolted. The resolution of the episode, with Rubin eventually dying and Anatomy Park being relocated to a new host, demonstrates another aspect of the show's comforting approach to chaos. Even in failure and death, there's a sense of continuity and adaptation. The project doesn't end with Rubin's death. It evolves and continues. This acceptance of inevitable change within structured systems mirrors how we might approach our own anxieties about change and mortality. The episode's true genius lies in how it takes something inherently anxiety-inducing, being trapped in a deteriorating environment with no apparent escape, and transforms it into an adventure with clear objectives and solutions. By giving viewers a roadmap through this chaos, it creates a strangely reassuring experience that mimics how we wish we could navigate our own internal anxieties and fears. From navigating a decaying body to witnessing the fracturing of time itself, Rick and Morty's exploration of uncertainty reaches its peak when a simple frozen time experiment goes catastrophically wrong. Ever wondered why watching screens split into 36 different realities feels strangely calming rather than anxiety-inducing? The answer lies in how our brains process the visualization of our deepest fears. A Rickle in Time begins with the aftermath of a frozen time experiment where Rick, Morty, and Summer have been cleaning up the house after a wild party. When they finally unfreeze time, something goes terribly wrong. Their uncertainty about their actions causes reality itself to split. With each moment of indecision, the timeline fractures further, creating multiple overlapping versions of the same scene playing out with subtle differences. What makes this episode particularly fascinating is how it visualizes quantum uncertainty, a concept normally restricted to theoretical physics equations. Rather than just telling us about uncertainty, The show literally shows it through one of its most innovative visual techniques. The screen splits into boxes, each containing a slightly different version of events happening simultaneously. As characters become more uncertain, more screens appear, eventually creating a mosaic of 36 different timelines, all playing out at once. This visual representation does something remarkable. It transforms an abstract scientific concept into something we can actually see and process. When we watch Rick, Morty, and Summer navigate through these fractured timelines, we're essentially watching a visual metaphor for those racing thoughts that keep us awake at night. You know the ones, where your mind keeps spinning through all the possible outcomes of a decision or replaying an awkward moment from 7 different angles. The episode's structure mirrors this mental process perfectly. It starts simply enough, just a few timeline splits. But as anxiety and uncertainty grow among the characters, the complexity increases exponentially. Rick even provides a self-aware commentary when he says, "What if we could just keep splitting time until we find the perfect outcome?" A question that might feel familiar to anyone who's ever lain awake at night, overthinking every possible scenario of tomorrow's big meeting. There's something oddly therapeutic about watching this visualization of uncertainty. When our own minds race with possibilities at night, it feels chaotic and overwhelming. But A Wrinkle in Time externalizes this process, giving form to formless anxiety. As viewers, we can watch these characters literally facing infinite versions of themselves and their choices. A perfect visual representation of that 3 a.m. thought spiral keeping you awake. The color palette of the episode enhances this effect. The background of each timeline box gradually shifts to a soft blue hue as the timelines multiply, creating a visually soothing effect despite the chaotic narrative. This color choice subtly signals to our brains that we're entering a dreamlike state, even as the plot itself becomes increasingly complex. What's most interesting is how the episode resolves all this uncertainty. Rather than suggesting we should try to control every possible outcome, an impossible task that would only increase anxiety, the story shows how the characters must ultimately accept the uncertainty and work within it. Rick, typically the character most determined to control everything, must ultimately surrender to uncertainty before finding his way back to a single timeline. This approach mirrors what sleep experts often recommend for people struggling with nighttime anxiety. Instead of fighting against racing thoughts, acknowledge them, accept their presence, and gently guide your mind toward resolution. The episode follows this exact therapeutic arc, starting with denial, moving through increasing chaos, and finally reaching acceptance. The most soothing aspect might be that despite the 36 different realities we witness, certain constants remain throughout all timelines. Rick still cares about Morty and Summer, though he'd never admit it. Family bonds persist, and eventually, order returns from chaos. This offers viewers a comforting message. Even when everything seems uncertain, some fundamental truths remain stable. By the episode's conclusion, all the fractured timelines have collapsed back into a single reality. This narrative structure creates a deeply satisfying arc that mirrors how we want our own anxious thoughts to resolve before sleep, from chaotic possibilities to a single, manageable reality. Psychology research confirms why this might be so effective as pre-sleep viewing. When we experience anxiety about uncertainty, our brains often try to control things by generating more scenarios and possibilities. A Wrinkle in Time takes this process and externalizes it, allowing us to watch uncertainty play out to its natural conclusion without personally experiencing the emotional turmoil. It's a form of exposure therapy through fiction. The episode also delivers one of the show's most visually hypnotic experiences. The repetitive pattern of splitting screens creates a predictable rhythm that, despite showing chaos, actually becomes metronomic in its reliability. Each split follows the same visual and audio cues, creating a consistent pattern that our brains can predict and find comfort in, similar to how white noise machines help lull people to sleep. There's a particular genius in how the episode balances complexity with clarity. Even at its most chaotic moment, with 36 different timelines playing simultaneously, the viewer can still follow the core narrative. This offers the perfect level of cognitive engagement for pre-sleep viewing. complex enough to distract from your own anxious thoughts, but structured enough not to demand full analytical attention. The episode's resolution provides a uniquely satisfying form of closure. After witnessing virtually every possible outcome play out simultaneously, we return to a single timeline where the family's relationships remain intact. This creates a profound sense of relief and acceptance, the exact emotional state conducive to falling asleep. What makes A Wrinkle in Time particularly effective as a sleep aid is that it transforms one of our deepest fears, uncertainty about the future, into a contained visual experience with a clear resolution. We get to witness characters facing the extreme version of the very thing that often keeps us awake, infinite possibilities and choices, and then we get to see them navigate through it successfully. Beyond the multiverse and sci-fi adventures, Rick and Morty's most hypnotic element might be hiding in plain sight: the toxic attachment between its titular characters. Their predictable cycle of exploitation, adventure, danger, and rare genuine connection creates a rhythm that mirrors our own complicated relationships, just with more interdimensional portals and fewer family therapy sessions. At its core, Rick and Morty's relationship operates on a fundamental imbalance of power. Rick, the brilliant but deeply damaged scientist, consistently exploits his grandson's need for validation, while simultaneously relying on him for emotional support he can't get elsewhere. This dynamic isn't just backdrop to their adventures, it's the emotional engine driving the entire series forward. The toxic bond they share becomes oddly mesmerizing to watch, especially when we're trying to quiet our minds before sleep. Episodes like the Ricklantis Mix-Up take this core relationship and multiply it across countless dimensions, showing us how different versions of these characters end up in similar patterns regardless of their circumstances. We see Rick's exploitation of Morty isn't just a personal flaw, but almost an inevitable outcome of their power dynamic. There's something strangely soothing about this predictability. Even across infinite realities, certain relationship patterns remain consistent. In the Rick-Turian-Morty date, we witness a rare moment when Morty directly challenges Rick's authority, temporarily breaking their cycle before eventually returning to a slightly modified version of their original dynamic. This episode perfectly encapsulates the show's approach to their relationship, allowing for moments of growth and change while maintaining the underlying attachment pattern that defines them. What makes this toxic relationship so compelling as nighttime viewing is the philosophical tension it creates. Rick's nihilistic worldview suggests nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, while Morty's persistent idealism represents our own desperate search for meaning. As the series progresses, we watch Morty grapple with his self-worth in relation to Rick's often dismissive attitude, gradually developing a more nuanced understanding of his place in the universe. There's a hypnotic quality to the predictable rhythm of their interactions. Almost every episode follows a similar emotional pattern. Rick proposes an adventure or solution that puts Morty at risk. Morty expresses frustration or fear. They embark on the adventure anyway. Chaos ensues, and they either learn something, rarely, or simply move on to the next crisis, more commonly. This reliable emotional cadence creates a form of narrative meditation that's surprisingly effective at quieting an anxious mind. What's fascinating is how the show's creators have intentionally developed this dynamic. The writers have carefully explored themes of toxic attachment and the emotional ramifications of Rick and Morty's adventures together. This isn't accidental storytelling. It's a deliberate examination of how relationships can be simultaneously nurturing and destructive, often in the same moment. When Rick and Morty do experience genuine connection, these moments feel earned precisely because they emerge from a sea of dysfunction. An insult-laden conversation that ends with a brief acknowledgement of care carries more emotional weight than an overtly sentimental exchange would. The show creates a unique form of emotional catharsis by making us work for these moments of authentic connection, much like we do in our own complicated relationships. Part of what makes watching their toxic dynamic so oddly comforting before sleep is that it allows us to process our own relationship patterns from a safe distance. When we watch Rick's nihilism clash with Morty's idealism, we're really examining universal questions about how we connect with others despite fundamental differences in worldview. Seeing these patterns played out in animated form provides an emotional release valve for our own complex family dynamics. The predictable cycle of their relationship also creates a kind of psychological safety. Even when Rick and Morty find themselves in literally universe-ending scenarios, viewers can rely on certain emotional constants. Rick will deflect vulnerability with humor or aggression. Morty will initially resist before being drawn into the adventure. They'll face danger together, and despite everything, they'll continue their journey side by side. This reliability creates a peculiar comfort zone, even within chaotic narratives. Psychological concepts about toxic attachment suggest that viewing dysfunctional relationships in fiction can serve a therapeutic purpose. When we watch Rick and Morty navigate their complicated bond, we're processing our own emotional struggles in a context that feels safe because it's removed from our immediate reality. The exaggeration of their dynamic, where the stakes involve multiverse catastrophes rather than everyday conflicts, creates emotional distance that allows for deeper processing. The show's genius lies in making this toxic relationship feel like an emotional constant in a universe defined by its changeability. In a series where reality itself is fluid and identity is constantly questioned, the dysfunctional pattern between Rick and Morty becomes an anchor point. Not because it's healthy, but because it's reliably present. This reliability creates the rhythmic quality that makes it so effective as nighttime viewing. What's particularly ingenious about this relationship is how it evolves without fundamentally changing. Early seasons show Morty as almost completely submissive to Rick's will, while later episodes reveal a Morty who's become more assertive and aware of his grandfather's manipulation. Yet the core dynamic remains: a dance of dependence, resentment, adventure, and occasional genuine affection that creates a psychological pattern viewers can predict and follow. The relationship between Rick and Morty ultimately works as a sleep aid because it transforms our anxieties about connection into a contained narrative experience. We get to witness characters navigating the extreme version of something many of us struggle with: how to love difficult people who both hurt and help us, and then we get to see them continue functioning despite the complications. There's comfort in watching others manage the very emotional complexity that might otherwise keep us awake at night. The Smith family's dysfunction doesn't just make for good comedy. It provides a funhouse mirror that transforms everyday family problems into cosmic catastrophes with universe-ending consequences. When Beth utters, "I don't want to be a part of this family if it means being like you," she's not having a typical parent-child argument. She's confronting her identity across multiple realities, making our own family therapy sessions seem refreshingly manageable by comparison. Each Smith family member carries psychological baggage that gets amplified through the show's sci-fi lens, creating a strange comfort as we drift towards sleep. Beth's abandonment issues don't just manifest in typical ways like fear of commitment or trust problems. They're explored through literal cloning, forcing her to confront whether she's the real Beth or just a duplicate living someone else's life. This extreme version of identity crisis transforms our own questions about authenticity into something contained and watchable. Jerry's insecurity isn't just portrayed through the standard sitcom tropes of a bumbling husband. His inadequacy literally manifests as an alien parasite at one point, turning his emotional vulnerability into a physical threat that must be confronted. When Jerry's insecurities threaten the family, it's not just embarrassing, it's potentially apocalyptic. There's something oddly soothing about watching these exaggerated consequences play out, making our own family's dysfunction seem mundane by comparison. Summer's search for identity takes on cosmic proportions too. Rather than just experimenting with different friend groups or fashion choices like teens in conventional shows, Summer grapples with discovering she was an unplanned pregnancy in some dimensions and doesn't exist in others. Her existential crisis about her place in the family becomes an actual crisis about her place in the multiverse. Autoerotic assimilation perfectly demonstrates how the show uses sci-fi concepts to explore family dynamics in ways that feel strangely therapeutic. Rick's relationship with Unity, a hive mind that can control entire populations, serves as a metaphor for how his emotional detachment impacts the Smith family. When Unity eventually rejects Rick, we see him at his most vulnerable, attempting suicide after being abandoned by the only entity complex enough to understand him. This moment illuminates Beth's own abandonment issues in a new light, helping us understand why she continues to seek her father's approval despite his toxicity. In The ABCs of Beth, the show uses cloning as a brilliant metaphor for Beth's internal conflict about her identity and her role within the family. When Rick offers Beth the chance to create a clone of herself so she can escape her family life and explore the universe, it transforms the common fantasy of escaping responsibility into a literal choice with cosmic implications. The episode reveals Beth's darkest insecurities, that she might be more like her father than she wants to admit, capable of abandoning her family just as he did. When she asks Rick if she's evil, it's not just typical self-doubt but a question about her fundamental nature across all possible realities. What makes these exaggerated family problems so effective as sleep aids is how they process universal emotional struggles through absurdist sci-fi filters. The Smith family's problems mirror our own, but their cosmic scale provides a peculiar comfort. Are you worried about living up to your parents' expectations? Well, at least you're not Beth, who might be a clone wondering if. Her entire existence is authentic. Feeling insecure in your relationship? At least you're not Jerry, whose insecurity literally manifested as a civilization-threatening parasite. This transformation of everyday anxieties into contained narrative experiences with clear resolutions offers viewers a form of emotional processing. When we watch Beth confront her father's abandonment through the lens of cloning technology, we're processing our own attachment issues without directly confronting them. It's like emotional exposure therapy through science fiction, facing our fears in a context that feels safe because of its absurdity. The recurring emotional themes across the Smith family's adventures, abandonment, identity, belonging, and control, create a rhythmic pattern that's almost hypnotic in its reliability. No matter how bizarre the adventure, these core emotional struggles remain consistent, providing a familiar emotional framework even as the sci-fi concepts grow increasingly outlandish. This consistency creates a soothing effect similar to a lullaby, a predictable pattern that signals safety despite chaos. Even in episodes focused on wild concepts, the Smith family dynamics remain the emotional anchor. When Jerry's insecurity transforms into an actual alien parasite feeding on his need for validation, the situation is simultaneously ridiculous and emotionally resonant. We recognize the exaggerated manifestation of a common emotional struggle, allowing us to process our own insecurities through Jerry's cosmic misadventures. The show balances cynicism with moments of genuine connection that feel earned precisely because of the dysfunction surrounding them. When Beth and Jerry decide to stay together after experiencing alternative versions of themselves, it's not just a typical reconciliation scene. It's a choice made with cosmic awareness of all other possibilities. This adds weight to their decision, making their connection feel more meaningful despite, or perhaps because of, all the dysfunction that preceded it. Summer's journey throughout the series also offers catharsis for viewers struggling with questions of identity and purpose. Her gradual evolution from a self-absorbed teenager to someone capable of understanding the cosmic absurdity of her family situation mirrors our own growth in understanding family dynamics. Her increasing ability to navigate the chaos of the Smith household provides a roadmap for viewers processing their own family dysfunction. What makes the Smith family dynamics particularly effective as a sleep aid is how they transform anxiety into acceptance. The show doesn't suggest that family dysfunction can be easily resolved. Instead, it presents a family that continues functioning despite their issues. They face literal apocalypses together, return home, and somehow maintain their family unit despite everything. There's comfort in watching characters navigate extreme versions of emotional complications we recognize, then seeing them continue existing despite those complications. Psychological research indicates that fictional family dynamics can help viewers process their own family issues by providing a safe space to explore complex emotions. The exaggerated nature of the Smith family's dysfunctions allows audiences to confront their feelings of abandonment, identity, and belonging from a comfortable distance. By witnessing Beth struggle with her father's legacy, Jerry confront his inadequacy, and Summer find her place in a chaotic family, viewers can process similar emotions in their own lives without directly confronting painful realities. Beyond the Smith family's emotional landscape lies something paradoxically soothing: Rick's complete dismissal of meaning itself. His cosmic nihilism that insists nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's gonna die, seems bleak on the surface, but when you're anxiously overthinking at midnight, these words can feel like the universe giving you permission to finally rest. Rick's nihilistic worldview operates on a simple premise. In an infinite multiverse with infinite possibilities, nothing we do has lasting significance. On paper, this sounds incredibly depressing. A philosophy that strips away all meaning and purpose from human existence. Yet many viewers find themselves drawn to Rick's perspective precisely when they're trying to quiet their anxious minds at night. There's something oddly liberating about embracing cosmic insignificance when you're lying awake at 3 a.m. worrying about that awkward thing you said at work. When Rick casually mentions that nothing matters in an infinite universe, he's not just being cynical. He's offering a strangely effective antidote to human anxiety. This perspective works as a philosophical sedative by putting our problems in proper scale. That presentation you're nervous about tomorrow? That relationship stress keeping you awake? In an infinite cosmos with unlimited dimensions, these concerns shrink to microscopic significance. Not because they aren't real, but because their power over us becomes optional when viewed through Rick's cosmic lens. The concept of cosmic indifference runs throughout Rick's philosophy, the idea that the universe doesn't care about human existence or suffering. While this might sound pessimistic, many viewers report finding genuine relief in this perspective. When you're plagued by insomnia, fueled by regrets or worries, the notion that the universe isn't judging your mistakes can be profoundly comforting. Rick's worldview essentially tells us, the universe doesn't care about your embarrassing moment, so why should you? This cosmic perspective doesn't invalidate feelings, but it offers a broader context that can help quiet an overactive mind. What makes Rick's nihilism particularly effective as emotional balm is how it removes the pressure of significance. In episodes like 60 Minutes, Rick introduces the family to interdimensional television not to entertain them, but to show them infinite versions of themselves making different choices. When Morty gets upset seeing happy versions of his parents in other realities, Rick provides one of his most famous nihilistic comforts. Nobody belongs anywhere, nobody exists on purpose, everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV. This isn't just a dismissal, it's Rick's version of compassion, offering freedom from the weight of consequence. Similarly, in Rick Potion number 9, after Rick accidentally mutates the entire world's population and fails to fix it, he simply finds a reality where alternate versions of themselves died after solving the same problem. They literally step over their own corpses and continue their lives in this new reality. Rick's ability to shrug off catastrophe isn't merely callousness. It's his coping mechanism for an existence where he's seen too much to maintain conventional emotional attachments. This detachment provides a framework for managing anxiety that works surprisingly well for many viewers. When we're caught in cycles of overthinking, Rick's philosophy offers an escape hatch, a way to step outside our immediate problems and see them from a cosmic perspective that renders them manageable. It's not that our problems disappear, but they become right-sized. The philosophical concept of cosmic indifference that Rick embodies offers a unique form of relief from personal anxiety. By framing individual problems as insignificant within the grand scheme of things, this perspective removes the perceived weight of our daily struggles. Worrying about a job interview tomorrow? In a universe of infinite possibilities, this single moment carries less significance than we typically assign it. Rick's nihilism functions like an existential meditation technique, allowing viewers to mentally zoom out from their problems until they appear as small as they actually are in the cosmic perspective. What makes Rick's character particularly fascinating is how often his actions contradict his stated philosophy. Despite routinely declaring that nothing matters, Rick consistently demonstrates deep emotional connections, particularly with Morty. This contradiction creates a complex character who embodies both cosmic horror and genuine heart. We see this most clearly in his relationship with Morty, while he often dismisses the importance of their bond with caustic remarks. His actions frequently reveal a desire to protect and support his grandson. This tension between Rick's nihilistic statements and his protective actions suggests that his nihilism isn't as absolute as he professes. It's more a psychological defense mechanism, a way to process his own emotional vulnerabilities by denying their importance. For viewers, this internal struggle creates a relatable figure who, like us, tries to balance cosmic awareness with human attachment. We watch Rick struggle with this philosophical contradiction and find comfort in seeing someone else navigate the same existential questions we face. The show's brilliance lies in how it balances Rick's cosmic horror with genuine emotional moments. Rick isn't portrayed as having found the answer. He's shown as someone still wrestling with the implications of his own worldview. His nihilism isn't presented as aspirational, but as one flawed human's response to an overwhelming reality. This nuanced portrayal allows viewers to process their own anxieties through Rick's experiences without suggesting they should adopt his perspective wholesale. For viewers lying awake with racing thoughts, Rick's philosophy offers permission to let go, not of caring entirely, but of the overwhelming pressure to make everything significant. His cosmic perspective reminds us that most of our worries are temporary and localized, not universe-ending catastrophes. This reframing helps quiet the internal voice that catastrophizes every problem, making it easier to transition from anxious wakefulness to peaceful sleep. The vat of acid episode might be the perfect counterpoint to Rick's cosmic indifference we just explored. While Rick's nihilism offers an escape from significance, this episode forces us to confront the painful weight of our choices head-on. What if a simple reset button could erase your mistakes, but the emotional scars remained? Behind its absurd premise lies one of the most emotionally devastating stories in the entire series. The episode begins with a classic Rick and Morty setup. Rick creates a fake acid vat as an elaborate escape plan, but Morty embarrasses him by pointing out its flaws. In typical fashion, Rick's wounded ego drives him to prove Morty wrong, leading to the creation of a seemingly magical device, a remote control that allows Morty to save his place in reality and return to it whenever things go wrong. What makes this episode so emotionally potent is how it transitions from this ridiculous sci-fi premise into something genuinely heartfelt. Given this power, Morty doesn't use it for grand adventures or personal gain. Instead, we watch him build a relationship with a girl named Plantina. Their romance unfolds through a beautiful montage showing small, tender moments, sharing headphones on a bus, exchanging shy glances, surviving an airplane crash together, and building a life in the wilderness. This relationship becomes the emotional center of the episode, grounding the bizarre premise in something deeply human. The show takes its time developing this connection, letting viewers become invested in Morty's happiness. We see him make genuine sacrifices, work through challenges, and experience authentic joy, all rendered with surprising emotional sincerity for a show known for its cynicism. The episode's structure deliberately builds this emotional investment only to deliver one of the most brutal gut punches in the series. When Rick reveals the truth, that the remote hasn't been saving Morty's place, but instead killing alternate versions of him and replacing him in timelines where he didn't make mistakes. The horror of what Morty has done crashes down on him. Every reset button press represents a life abandoned and a dead Morty. What makes this revelation particularly devastating is hearing Morty desperately trying to process this information through the lens of his relationship. "I can't love you. I just can't. Please understand." This simple line captures the crushing weight of his realization that everything he built with Plantina was essentially erased. The girlfriend he loved doesn't even know who he is anymore in this timeline. The episode taps into universal human experiences of regret and loss. Haven't we all wished for a magical undo button after making a mistake? The devastating twist is that even if we could erase our actions, we can't erase the memory of making them or the emotions attached to them. Morty must carry the emotional weight of his relationship with Plantina, even though, for her, it never happened. This painful asymmetry, one person remembering a relationship the other has no knowledge of, resonates with anyone who's ever experienced a breakup where the shared history suddenly becomes one-sided. What's particularly interesting about this episode is how it uses its science fiction concept to explore psychological processes that many of us experience during sleepless nights. At 3 a.m., our minds often replay mistakes and imagine alternate timelines where things went differently. The Vat of Acid episode externalizes this mental process, showing how even if we could somehow reset our lives, the emotional consequences would remain. The episode's emotional devastation actually serves a cathartic purpose for viewers. By witnessing Morty's journey through love, loss, and painful acceptance, we process our own feelings of regret at a safe distance. The absurdity of the sci-fi framing makes the emotional punch digestible, creating a perfect balance that allows us to confront difficult emotions without becoming overwhelmed by them. This balance is particularly well suited for nighttime viewing. The episode's pacing creates a rhythm that builds emotional investment, releases tension through humor, delivers a powerful emotional climax, and then offers a form of resolution, though not necessarily a happy one. This emotional arc mirrors the process many of us need to go through before sleep, acknowledging our regrets and anxieties, but finding a way to set them aside. The episode also raises profound questions about identity and continuity. If Morty's memories define who he is, does it matter that the external world doesn't share those memories? This exploration of the disconnect between our internal and external realities touches on anxieties many people experience while trying to fall asleep. The feeling that our internal emotional experiences are disconnected from the world around us. What ultimately makes the Vat of Acid episode so effective as nighttime viewing is how it transforms abstract philosophical questions about identity, memory, and regret into concrete emotional experiences. Rather than just telling us that actions have consequences, it makes us feel those consequences through Morty's journey. The episode builds emotional investment through its pacing, juxtaposing comedic moments with serious themes and shifting from lighthearted absurdity to a poignant exploration of love and loss. The catharsis comes not from a happy ending, but from watching Morty confront the painful reality of his choices. This process, facing difficult emotions and finding a way to live with them, mirrors what many people need to do before they can fall asleep. By externalizing this process through fiction, the episode helps viewers process their own feelings of loss and regret from a comfortable distance. As we've explored throughout these tales, there's something remarkably therapeutic about Rick and Morty's particular blend of absurdity and emotional depth. Psychologists have actually found that this combination provides a uniquely comforting experience for viewers. The show's bizarre scenarios and cosmic horrors create a safe distance that makes it easier to process complex emotions, exactly what we need when winding down for sleep. When characters like Rick confront their fears and vulnerabilities, even through the most ridiculous scenarios, we're given permission to explore our own emotional landscapes in a non-threatening way. This emotional processing is essential for transitioning into sleep. The strange stories create a sense of safety and familiarity, even as they take us to the farthest reaches of the multiverse. So tonight, as the adventures of an alcoholic scientist and his grandson play out on your screen, remember that finding comfort in these weird tales isn't just about entertainment. It's a form of emotional processing that helps quiet the mind. Sometimes the strangest sci-fi concepts make the most effective lullabies.